Good morning, friends. Good morning. Welcome to today's episode of the Checkin In podcast. My name is Binyam. I'm glad to have you guys here. I was just getting everything set up and I realized I hadn't pressed the right feature on the TikTok. But here we are, all live again. Live on the TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And of course, the recording goes on my Spotify and the YouTube and the Instagram channel. But glad to have you guys here. Good morning, friends. I see you, Natasha. I see you, Brandon. Welcome, Ollie. How are you? Thanks for joining again. Today is, let's see, what's the date today? The 29th of October, 2021. We are at the threshold of November. Halloween is just around the corner this weekend. Today is Friday. Everyone who looks forward to the weekend is especially, I'm sure, happy on a day like today. But I'm glad to spend these few moments at the beginning of our Friday together as we do the three key things that we'd like to focus on this podcast. Today's episode, it is episode number 85, friends. 85, my goodness. We are continuing to log time in together. And I'm really thrilled by what I've experienced so far. So I'm so grateful that you guys have joined me along for this ride. Really grateful for the time you spend because together this becomes a collaboration, doesn't it? It becomes a collaboration. You can see the sun is just coming up. Actually, it's not really coming up. It's somewhat cloudy here in Calgary. We are anticipating our first snowfall today. Thanks, Salam. How are you, my dear? So, that aside, Ollie, I'm doing well. Thank you. The three key pillars that we like to focus on the Checkin In podcast: awareness, kindness, happiness. Awareness in getting to know ourselves as well as we can. Can I suggest something? You are so worthwhile getting to know, but not me getting to know you first, but you getting to know yourself first. I believe one of the key components, I'll answer that question in just a sec, user 1467. One of the key components in connecting with others is knowing who we're presenting. And if we don't know ourselves well enough, it's really helpful to start on that premise, knowing yourself well enough. In Addis Salam, that's amazing. That is fantastic. My dear friend Josh is on here as well, too. Glad to have you. 1467, I'm taking a break from Uber at the moment, but I will plan to go back on Uber in time. For the time being, I am just doing a bit of a redirect, which you'll hear about a little bit more in today's podcast. So glad to have you guys here. So again, the three key elements that we focus on: awareness of ourselves, because it's good to know who we are and how we're wired and what we're launching off into the world with as far as our desires, our thoughts, our convictions. Secondly, the kindness piece is also critical. The kindness piece whereby we are attending to ourselves and saying, how can we exercise and be generous in showing kindness to ourselves? Because as we go through life, there are plenty of seasons of change, aren't there? And in the midst of those, most of us, I would suggest, struggle by way of encouraging ourselves through those processes. Instead, we've been brought up in this culture where we are really good at diminishing ourselves. We're really good at ripping ourselves apart. We're really good at speaking in ways that are less than affirming. I heard a fantastic exercise some time back, and I think some of you might have heard this. If we were to talk to others the way we're taught to talk to ourselves, most of us would be aghast. We'd be like, holy crap, there's no way I can speak to anyone the way I speak to myself, because the way I speak to myself is in such a denigrating way. It's in such a ripping apart kind of way, a dismantling, a disassembling way, that we are in shock and horror about the ever thinking about communicating that way to the people around us that are close, our friends, our family, our kids, our those who are really who we value in our lives. We would never dare to talk to them that way. And so the question is, how can we speak to ourselves with a similar care and concern? My dear friend Joshua is a psychologist, one of my dearest friends here in Calgary. We spent lots of time together, and he says self-compassion is very important. Absolutely. Please say hello to Sam for me as well, Joshua. They are beloved friends. If you want to hear some more of what I do aside from this podcast, Joshua is also part of another podcast that I do called Friendology, which is featured on the YouTube channel and on Spotify, Friendology. And so you can get to know Joshua a lot better there too, and he's a dear friend. Jafu, how are you? Good to see you. All right, so we like to talk about awareness, the kindness piece, and then the happiness piece. Happiness, not because happiness is the best of all the emotions. I would suggest that all the emotions have their place. They have the part that they play integrally in expressing what's going on internally for us. These are tools that we can use that help describe what's going on the interior. And I want to legitimize all those emotions. I think the part that is maybe more relatable for most of you who are in my listening cast is that when we experience some of those emotions, it's really difficult, isn't it? Really difficult because how do you wrestle your way through a season of grief if you've just lost someone who's very close to you? How do you express jealousy when you have that feeling creep up? We feel guilty about expressing that, right? How do you express anger when you get really angry? How do you express that in a way that is appropriate instead of the destructive forms that most of us may be more familiar with, right? How do we express, say, worry or anxiety or fear? Like so many of these emotions that we've categorized and put into this folder that says untouchable. I don't want to deal with that because I don't know how to deal with that. Well, I think that all those emotions are legitimate and worthwhile getting familiar with because they help tell what's going on internally and enable us to move forward in such a way whereby we can practice what that looks like to experience happiness as we process all these other things. I believe the more space that those other difficult emotions take up in our hearts, the more difficult it is for us to have space for happiness. And who doesn't like to experience happiness, right? Salam says, important, but very, very difficult for some. Absolutely. And that's why I want to create a forum. I want to create a context in which we can talk about it and encourage one another and benefit from each other's experiences. Hence the Bin Checking In podcast. The three pillars again: awareness, kindness, and happiness. Happiness I feature specifically as a way of saying, hey, let's experience more happiness as we work through and process all of the other emotions. And sometimes we just need help, right? We need help to be able to get to those. And so that's where I encourage you to invest in your mental health by seeking out the services of a counselor like my friend Authentically Joshua on Instagram or wherever your setting is geographically, to look for help that way, to look for friends who you trust, who have a really good beat and consistency in the way that they interact and engage socially. So, with that said, let's jump into today's question. For those of you who are new, what we do to usually on the Bin Checking In podcast, I usually have a reflection question that I go through per episode, and I analyze that question, seeing the merits of said question, and then we dive into answering it. I encourage you to participate as well if you feel comfortable, but I definitely do the same on my end. So I want to model what that looks like as I try to become a better version of me through becoming more aware of myself, expressing kindness to myself, and finally pursuing happiness in the midst of experiencing all the other emotions. Adir, how are you? What age did you lose my virginity? That's an interesting question, Adir. But I don't mind answering questions. For me, it was later in life. I was 30 years old when I got married. And so it's later than most, I think, would experience, but that was my experience. Let's see here. Christian, how are you, man? Good to see you. How can I help myself with overthinking? Great question. Ooh, hmm. In the overthinking category, I wonder what is the driving motivation there. For some, I wonder if it isn't maybe pursuit of perfectionism, trying to like get things right in such a certain way, and so you overthink things, trying to get things in just the right order or in just the right combination. I'm not sure if that's the dynamic that you're struggling with. For others, it might be insecurity. They just don't know if it's good enough, perhaps, right? I'm not sure what is the driving motivation behind the overthinking component. There might be a variety of other reasons. But what I'd probably say is acknowledging it is a very fantastic starting place. It looks like you're already having some success there and saying, I'm observing this expression in my existence of overthinking. So acknowledging it is a really good starting place. You go on to say, Christian, it's so too with trust in a relationship and with my past too. I've been cheated on, so I always do it. Ah, gotcha. So there is also that element where Past experiences, especially painful ones, will cause us to lose confidence in the way to go forward. We're trying to think, is this the best way to go forward? Should I try something different? Is there something I'm missing along the way? Is there a way that I could avoid the pain that I experienced in the past? And so yours, you're saying, is more so to do with trust in a relationship. That's a huge one, bro. And I appreciate the question. So, what would I say to you in a very short spell, and then while encouraging you to go and get more insight from professionals and from trusted friends as well? Get a variety of input. Be open with sharing with your friends so that they can keep you accountable. Because in community, my dear friend, you'll find a lot of safety, right? You'll find a lot of helpful suggestions, friends who are asking you about how it's going. So I would say know if you have that safety in community to be able to express that the desire for help. But in the meantime, in my short answer to how to deal with overthinking, especially in trust and relationships, especially with difficult experiences in the past, I would suggest coming to a couple of acknowledgments. Okay, so you've already acknowledged that you overthink and you have had past painful experiences, which is another helpful key. So you have really keen insight, and I love that about you, Christian. I would say here's something I would propose, not to discourage you, but more so to say, here's the lay of the land. Um, People are going to hurt us eventually, right? People are going to hurt us. It just see, like for me, for example, if you and I were friends, I would be almost anticipating at some point, Christian, I'm going to say something or do something, whether intentionally or unintentionally, that may hurt you, right? And the intention there that I'm watching for is, what is the follow up? Does this person's intention aim for breaking apart what we're trying to build together in our friendship, or does it build up? Do I come back as soon as possible and say, Christian, my friend, I'm really sorry I did that. I regret my decision there. How can we place some boundaries so that we don't have to experience this again? How can we learn to communicate a little bit better? So even as we try to get to be better versions of ourselves in community, the reality is that we are going to disappoint each other. We are going to experience those sadnesses that come, just because we sometimes, in our expression of humanity, do things that we regret. And so, first, I would say acknowledge that people aren't perfect. We are going to hurt each other. So, give space that the people in your life that you're investing in, especially in a relational context where it's really close, are going to hurt you at some point. But what can you do in the way you're learning to communicate together that it keeps on getting better? That when those expressions do come up, you are able to get back to that place where the intentions are expressed to say, how can we get better? Thank you, man. It means a lot. I hope that's helpful for starters. And then be part of a community. As you're a part of a community, this is where I found for myself, my group of friends, we're able to watch each other's back. And so that's really important. Um, Yes. Kyle says, "Hello, Biniam. Just finished school. Been such a long week. How you been?" I'm doing amazing, Kyle. I'm in a better season at the end of the week than I was at the beginning. I'm going to tell you why in today's answer to my question, which I haven't quite read out yet. But I'm glad you're here, Kyle. Brandon says he does not trust people or SUVs. I hear you, Brandon. Can I suggest something, Brandon? You got in my SUV. That's how you and I met, in my Uber, right? You got in my Uber, which is an SUV. So kudos, man. I know, like, for those of you who do not know, Brandon was in a very life-changing accident where he was a passenger that got T-boned in the SUV that he was in, sustained brain damage, and he is moved on now and become something amazing, Brandon. Can I just say how amazing it is to see how you are going through life? And I can't wait to interview you on the podcast. So, nonetheless, yeah. Um, I'm just catching up with the comments here. Goodness, there's quite a few coming in here. Salam says, your suggestion is how to deal with the feeling of being an imposter syndrome, especially in certain professions. Okay, suggestions on how to deal with feeling like being an imposter, like an imposter syndrome, Salam. I would say, great questions today, by the way, friends. Great questions. Can I suggest the starting point that I find helpful, Salam, is reminding myself that those who I am in that community with are um, thank you, Brandon, for clarifying. You weren't in an SUV. You were hit by an SUV. That is a good point. You are right. Yes. Thank you. That's a correction. Salam, I would say in your context, I if I were in your context struggling with the imposter syndrome, I would remind myself first and foremost that these people that I'm looking up to and who are like the ones that I'm saying, they're so far ahead of me. I want to remind myself that they're human just like me, that they're human beings just like me, and we're equal in that valuation of our humanness. Now, they might have a far more experience in whatever we're both, sharing commonness in maybe the work or profession. They might have more experience, Salam, and they might have more insights, but that doesn't change the fact that we're equal in our value as human beings. They may have more to contribute, but that doesn't illegitimize your contribution. In fact, I would say your perspective as you're coming in gives you a fresh take. Imagine, for example, Salam, those who are in their professions, in their careers, and they're kind of stuck in their ways of doing things. This is the way it's always done. And so they're not as open to other perspectives or other ideas of how to go through and experience how to get better at that profession, let's say. And it takes someone new coming in to be able to see the things that they may be missing, some insights that may be beyond their perspective. And so you definitely do have something worth contributing. And so that feeling of the imposter syndrome is really, in my perspective, fear speaking to you and saying, don't forget that you don't have as much to contribute as they. And that's just a fear tactic to say, keep quiet, keep safe, play it safe, as opposed to saying, speak up, ask questions, make your presence known. Legitimize your presence and the space you're taking up in this new area, and become a team player that is active in trying to get better, because you have every right, just like these individuals, to continue to excel and grow together. And that comes when you have that ability to be able to speak your mind, speak your heart, speak your questions, speak your truth. All that's really important, Salam. And so you definitely have something worthwhile contributing, especially from the vantage point of saying, can I see this with fresh eyes? Can I ask, why don't we consider it this way? What are the factors that take this off the table, for example? Or how can I think about this one here in a fresh lens here? And you might find in that way that you are bringing some fantastic, wonderful depth and richness to that sphere that you're stepping into. I hope that helps, Salam. Karina, my dear friend, I see you coming in. How are you? Friends, thanks for those questions. We are halfway through the podcast, past halfway here. Let me read today's question, and I'll briefly consider the merits for why we're answering today's question and why it's important, and then we'll dive into my response. Today's question specifically is, what were your biggest lessons from this last week, this last month, this last year? What were the biggest lessons that you've experienced this last week, this last month, and this past year? These, of course, are questions in relation to, you know, on my sheet, it says it's questions in relation to the present, but it seems more like the past, right? I'm looking to my lessons that I've learned in the past that still serve me today. You're so welcome, Salam. The pleasure is mine. So, the benefits of this question, your biggest lessons. Now we're looking for the big heavyweights here, and this almost presumes that we, in the process of change that we're going through, as we're growing together, we are actually also experiencing some growth. We are experiencing growth, especially through the experiences that we're going through. We're learning actively along the way. Here's why we value this. Here's why we don't value this. Here's why we're going this way. Here's why we're not going this way. Here's why we are choosing this over this. These decisions are usually premised on past experiences that enable us to walk into the future saying, how can we do this better? For example, the question that was asked here by Christian saying, hey, I overthink things, especially in the context of relationships. And this is because of past experiences. And so he's kind of kept in that zone. So I wanted to help him recalibrate those past experiences to say, how can you now use the past experiences, painful as they were, to propel you forward in growth in your future, right? This is what this question helps us do. What were your biggest lessons? What were the biggest takeaways? What were the biggest advancements that enable you to move forward from your lessons in the past week, in the last month, in the last year? So I love that it's getting us looking at the growth factor, especially from the past, that affects our present, that leads us into our future. That's really important. If you guys hear some banging in the background, there's some construction going on in my condo building. So hopefully that won't show up on the recording, or it won't obstruct our focus on our topic. So the biggest lessons, that for me speaks again to the fact that we're growing over time. We're continuing to grow as human beings. And that's a beautiful thing. How are you growing as an individual? How are you aware? There's that first pillar that we have. How are you aware of your growth as an individual? What does that look like for you in your experience? The biggest lessons is what we're aiming for here. And I think this is a good thing to focus on because it encourages us. When we look at our experience of growth, our experience of becoming the better versions of ourselves, this is an encouraging thing to see that we are growing towards a trajectory that is helpful and good, right? It's like seeing the investment of work paying off, right? It's like you were working really hard on the treadmill and running so you can run a marathon. And when you're able to finish that marathon, it's that sense of accomplishment. You have morphed into something more than what you were before. It's a beautiful thing. So there's encouragements as we consider this one here. And then it has three specific time frames. There's a very short term, there's the mid short term, and then there's the longer term of a year, right? So the week analysis, the month analysis, and the year analysis. I'm going to answer these in reverse order. And I'm answering these in reverse order because that's sort of the way that my story unfolds. And this answers the question of one who's asking, don't I still drive for Uber? Well, that question will be answered at the beginning of this year. And I can say that because we are almost at the end of the year now, approaching November. So at the beginning of this year, I was in a season where I was experiencing a lot of dreams. I had some big dreams. And this was a lesson for me because I was actually letting myself start to dream big. All this time in my life, I've always been sort of in the dependent category, dependent on the jobs that I do, dependent on the time schedule that someone sets for me, dependent on so many factors that didn't enable me to feel like I was experiencing what I desired to experience in my life. But at the beginning of this year, I had started dreaming about how amazing it would be if I could start my own business. How amazing it would be if I could start my own business, control what my hours look like, control the dynamic of what my work looks like, be able to invest myself in something that brought me value. I never dared to dream this because I didn't think it was possible. I didn't think that people would listen. I didn't think it was like that imposter syndrome, if you will, Salam, that imposter syndrome that I bought into saying, who am I? I'm a nobody. I don't have much to contribute or offer. I have little experience. I don't think that my voice has much weight that way. But as a result of being here online for the last couple of years, it's grown from that point where I started dreaming, saying, I have more confidence in who I am because I'm aware of me. I'm aware of my skill set. I'm aware of my gifts. I'm aware of the way that I am um, influence people around me and the power that my words have. I grew to this stature where I said, I think I'm confident with what I'm bringing to the table. So I can start dreaming now of what could be in my future context. And this is worthwhile for me to pursue. Exciting. That was where I was at the beginning of the year. I was walking to this new power of myself that said, I know I can handle what I'm walking into, and I'm willing to take that risk. I'm willing to step into it and dream big. So it's a dangerous thing when you encourage people to dream. Ollie, currently here it is 9:10 in the morning, 10 after 9. So that was a big shift for me to be able to step in that way and say, okay, I got what it takes here. And I would never encourage someone to dream big unless they have the fuel to keep on fueling that dream, right? I'd want to see that they have the passion, that they have the drive, they have the motivation, they have the diligence and the commitment. There's all these components that are really helpful to make sure that one who has a dream can really go, right? I want to encourage those elements. And that's what I was seeing in myself. That was the first biggest lesson that I had this year, that I can do this and it's worthwhile doing this. And I'm going to step into that role. I'm going to step into my power and express that desire, that dream that I have of what could be. This past month, what was my biggest lesson? It was risk. Just in the word risk. So my first year-long big lesson that I learned was, Binyam, dream big, because you have what it takes. You have that motivation, you have the drive, you've got the commitment, you've got the purpose, you've got the consistency, all those components that are really important for keeping a dream going. I was like, yep, I'm gonna go for it. This past month, the biggest lesson I learned was, I'm going to take a big risk here. I am not guaranteed at all of success, but based on all the information I have in front of me, I think I can take a big leap here and jump out this way and consider what could be here. So that was a big risk on my end. Huge risk. Huge risk. It was very uncomfortable. You guys, if you remember me expressing in some of my past episodes on the podcast, expressing, holy crap, this is outside of my comfort zone. This is really not in my what I do normally. And so I am stepping out this way in unfamiliar zone with no assurances, but I'm willing to take that risk. It's a huge risk, again, because I'm not always guaranteed that it's going to work well in my favor, right? So thanks always for those gifts that you're sending along the way. I appreciate you, my friend. So I stepped out that way into the unknown. And as I stepped into the unknown, I gave it all I got. I gave it all I got. I wasn't in half hearted, I was in wholeheartedly. I invested the best I could. I gave the best that I had. And so I, um, I'm really proud of how I walked in that season of discomfort, of unfamiliarity, of lack of guarantees. That was all beyond my scope of periphery. Sunny, hello, how are you? And then thirdly, the final big lesson that I learned in the last week was it, it's captured in the word resilience. I made the decision last week that things weren't going the way I had hoped and planned for in my business pursuits. In fact, I'd even stopped driving for Uber so I can focus solely on these business pursuits. I had some big goals and big ambitions, and they didn't come to pass. And so this past weekend, I made the decision to pull the plug for the time being. And it was really discouraging, super discouraging. I was at a low point this past weekend and into the earlier part of this week. I was really discouraged. I was really disappointed. I was really sad. It hit me really deep. I was like, I thought I'd done so well in preparing everything along the way, and it yet didn't go well. Sunny, the interview went fantastic. I'm going to start next week at a new role, which for me is it feels like a couple of steps backwards. I launched off into my own business because I valued, because of my experience as an Uber driver, having control of my own schedule and my own job and my own quality and all that kind of stuff that really meant a lot to me. And yet now signing up to go back to work on a schedule for someone else for me feels like a few steps backwards. And so there definitely was that experience of loss, but it's shifted over the week, Sunny, where I'll be in, my new job starting next week is I'm going to be a garbage truck driver, and so I'll share with you my experiences, of course, in that. However, what I was focusing on towards the end of this week was the word resilience, and I only came to that word because my sister shared it with me. My sister shared that word with me, and she said, one of the things that she really admires about me, she said, is that she really admires how I'm able to be resilient in the midst of discouragements. She really was admiring and appreciating me in a really helpful way because I didn't see this. But she said, it's amazing that you set everything and your goals on this plan and it didn't work out, but you're still in the game. You're still talking about how to re engage and get back into it and how you can. Make the best go of it and how you're going to come back to it. And yes, I'm going to come back to it. I'm still going to pursue it. I'm still going to create content. I'm still going to put courses out there. And I think right now I want to just put courses out there for free on my website, BennyMasters.com. I'm going to invest a lot more into that so I can serve you guys because my nature is super generous. I want to continue to add value as well as I can. So my biggest lesson this past week was seeing my resilience in the midst of discouragements, that I'm still going to keep on going, that I'm still going to be in the fight, that I'm still going to take the next step here. So I'm going to make a video perhaps later today in relation to all these evolutions, because most of my audience does not know about these shifts along the way. But I'll catch all of you up in a video I'll make later today. But all that to say, you get to hear firsthand from me here. So thank you for being a part of this walk with me. Thank you for joining me in these experiences of how I'm growing an awareness of myself, how I'm practicing to be kind to myself, showing kindness to myself, and how I'm pursuing happiness in the midst of processing all these other emotions. It wasn't a happy season for me this past weekend. It was a really sad one, and I needed to step out of my comfort zone and express that and share that with my friends, saying, hey, I just want you to know I'm not doing really well right now. Why? Because I want to live authentically and with integrity, with honesty. And so I know my friends would want to know when I'm not doing very well. They want to come alongside and encourage me as best as I can. And I don't want to pretend as if I don't need that, right? These are good things that we experience in life. What does that look like for us to walk into these experiences? Whew. That's today's podcast, my dear friends. Yeah, I find myself super grateful at this moment as I reflect on these lessons that I've learned this last year, this last month, this past week. It shows that I'm still growing, that I still have things I have yet to learn. And I love sharing that with you because I don't have it all together. But in the midst of not having it all together, it's okay. And I want to share that with you. Friends, have a great weekend. I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a fantastic Friday. Bye for now.